You're the second one of the day. The last session, I got through about a third of it. So I'm going to try to jump in certain places. If I really, I definitely get to areas that I absolutely will not let you leave without knowing this, because there's some huge stuff, okay? But Ron Tammen, okay, so if he were still alive, he'd be 91, which is kind of getting up there. He disappeared 72 years ago last Saturday, and we kind of had a little observance of that. I discovered Ron in 1978. I was a transfer student to Miami. I'm getting up there too, and graduated in 80. And so I got to go through Fisher Hall it was the spring, I think, of 78 before they tore it down. And I don't know if it affected me a whole lot. I don't remember a ton about it, but I think it must have, because in 2010, I was kind of going through a personal road, crossroads, and I wanted to write a book. I'm a writer by trade, and but I wanted to write something, not scientific. I'm a science writer. And I landed on Ron Tammen, and if somebody had said, this is going to be 15 years of your life, I don't know if I would have, continued. But I'm glad that nobody did say that, and, now I'm in, for real. Okay. How many of you have heard anything about Ron Tammen? Yeah, that's good. How many of you have not heard one thing about Ron Tammen? Yay, okay, that's good. I'm going to skip over some of the intro stuff because we really have to get to the juicy stuff, but we will get to as much as possible. Okay, and what really kills me is Oscar Decker, who was the police chief back in Oxford at the time. He used to complain about there's just no clues. Where are the clues? Oh my gosh, dude, I'm like 3 hours. I could talk for 3 hours on this. So this is Mr. and Mrs. Tammen. These are his siblings. So here we have John, Ron, and Richard. These are these were his immediate siblings. So John was born in 32, Ron in 33, and Richard in 34. Then there are 8, oops, I do that every time. 8 years go by, and Marcia is born in 42, and then Robert in 45. So they almost had like 2 separate families. And the first group, it was just the 3 boys. And Ron's the middle guy, and the middle child. I know all about being a middle child. That's who he was. John was the know-it-all, okay? I don't know if you can tell. To me, it looks like he's in a smoking jacket, at the age of 12, I don't know. And then Ron and Richard, and can you tell that Richard's got his chest out and stuff? He's a hothead, okay? He was annoying. He'd get in trouble at school all the time, okay? Ron was the nice one, and that's what people in the neighborhood always said. It's like if you lined him up, everybody would choose Ronnie, and that's what they called him, because he was the nice one. There were cousins, too. You can see the 3 guys. And these are Uncle John's daughters, Uncle John McCann's daughters, and they idolized Ron. Uncle John McCann, this is Marjorie's brother. At Miami, there's a scholarship in his name. He was a Miami graduate. He got a bachelor's and a master's in business. And he was a bond salesman. Okay, up until about 1950, he was selling bonds. And that's what Ron wanted to do. I want to be a bond salesman. I want to graduate from Miami in business. Okay, so role model here. And then this is Aunt Mary. And Aunt Mary was just the best aunt. She was always there for them, lend them her car. They didn't have a car as a family. She'd lend their car if they wanted to go somewhere beyond the bus route. So just really solid people. This is their home. Okay, and this was beginning in 1942, they moved here, but this is where they lived when Ron disappeared. And it's in Maple Heights, Ohio, which is a suburb of Cleveland. I took this picture in 2011, and if you Google that address now, nothing's there, okay? The house, it's very eerie. The house on either side is there, but this is just a vacant lot. Okay, and then here they are. This is Marcia with Mr. and Mrs. Tammen. Just very briefly, Mrs. Tammen did have a very tragic life, and this is before Ron disappeared. She had alcohol issues for her entire married life, and so that was something that was never brought out, that she had an alcohol addiction and died of cirrhosis of the liver, and she died 1 year after this picture was taken. And she was 51 years old in that picture. People age different now, but I think she aged dramatically, rapidly. Okay, and Ron in high school, he was like the perfect guy, as you can see. I mean, when people talk about Ron, he was just handsome, he was good, he was nice. But what I was finding when I was doing my interviews, I was trying to delve deeper into who he was. And so often I would bump into people who would say, well, he was nice, but I didn't really know him that well. And even his roommates, they would say, I didn't really know him that well. So it was like, geez, that's when you realize I do know who this person is. He's incredibly private. He didn't let many people know him. I never found a best friend. So kind of a loner. Yeah. The person who did know him the best was Brother John. And he told me some stories. One was that the thing that really made Ron tick was money. I'm not sure I would have loved Ron Tammen, to be honest, as I was getting to know more, because he was all about money. He was very serious. And the reason that he was so into money was because they were poor. This was a poor family. They grew up in the Depression, but Dad kind of had to pull himself through. He never went to college, and he just found a way. But the boys had to work jobs while they were young just to try to put food on the table. So this was something that became ingrained in him, that he was always trying to find ways to earn money. And one thing that Dad did was he sat them down and said, look, I will support you up through high school, but after that, you're on your own. Ron was caddying ever since he was 11 years of age, and that helped him get a scholarship to Miami through the Cleveland Golf Association. Okay, 52, 53. Ron's a sophomore, business major, just like Uncle John. He was a resident counselor in Fisher Hall. So he's a sophomore, and Fisher Hall is a freshman dorm. Are you familiar with Fisher Hall? Because it's not there anymore. Did anybody go through it? Okay, all right. Yeah, it wasn't in the best of condition, even when Ron was there. So this is 52, 53. In 58, they no longer allowed kids up on the second and third floors. 58. So it was kind of shabby, if you will. Fisher has a bad reputation because it has a storied past. And one of the things it was, I think everybody can say, it was an asylum, you know, when they said that. And so it was like a hospital for people with addictions, mental health issues. Before that, it was a women's college, and it was very ornate and beautiful, but not when Ron was there. Now, one thing a lot of people like to say, and when I was on my tour of Fisher Hall, you know, it was all about the ghosts and the phantoms. And so I'm going to say that Fisher Hall never had anything to do with Ron's disappearance, okay? The ghosts did not get him. Something happened, though, on the front porch or in that front yard that may have impacted his disappearance. Okay, and this is something that you probably didn't know, is that he was struggling. This is a guy, they portrayed him as being, you know, the perfect guy, but he was struggling with his grades and with his money, financially. Okay, this is what everybody remembers, talking about he was a Delt, and he was in the Campus Owls, played the string bass, he was a wrestler, and he worked as an RA in Fisher. That's what everybody was saying, university and parents. Here's the story. Things were coming off the rails for him in sophomore year. The freshman year, he was doing great. He had done 34 hours, so 17 hours per semester, and he has a 3.205 GPA. And that's the GPA that they kept telling us during his sophomore year. He had that in his freshman year. But look at his sophomore transcripts. And ignore these A's and B's, those aren't grades. Those are sections. These PWAAC, those are grades, okay? So he starts off with 17 hours in the first semester of his sophomore year. But what does he do? And this is early, I think. He drops two 3-hour courses. He's now got 11 hours. That is not a full-time student anymore. His second semester, when he disappeared, he had 15 hours. That's still considered full-time. But what does he do? He drops his psychology course. So this is the second time that he's dropped his general psychology course. And he's a business major, he likes money, and he's dropped economics. Why? What is going on? So I think what was going on was that scholarship of his. He had to maintain a B average. And I think he was juggling grades to try to maintain that B average. But it's putting him in jeopardy of A, he's getting way behind in his coursework, but B, by being a part-time student, all of a sudden he is at risk of being drafted because people who were, right, the young men at school, this is the Korean War, he was on a deferment and they required you to be a full-time student for that student deferment. So he's at a crisis when he disappears. Does that surprise anybody? Because they did not bring any of that out. They said, oh, he's doing great. And here he is taking out loans. He took out loans from professors. He's bringing in money. He's working for the Campus Owls. He's getting money with that. And as a resident counselor, he's getting at least helping with tuition with that. So he's actually bringing in more money than he was in his freshman year. And yet he is barely keeping his head above water. Okay, sorry, I have a Mac and this is, it looks a little squirrely sometimes. Let's talk about April 19th. Okay. Chuck Finley was Ron's roommate. And Chuck, very nice guy, they lived in room 225 Fisher. And Chuck was away for the weekend. For April 18th and 19th, he was gone. When he came back to the room, which was 10:30 at night on Sunday, that's according to Carl Knox's notes. Carl Knox did the investigation, found the door to the room open. Does this ring familiar with most of you? Okay, door to the room is open, lights are on, book is open, one book is open on his desk. Wallet, IDs, car keys are left in the desk. And then the car is parked outside and his string bass is outside in the back seat of the car. That's everything he owns, basically, except for the clothes on his back. So Chuck thinks, he walks in, the door's open. And they did that, by the way. Chuck and Ron used to leave their door open. He thinks nothing of it, He thinks, well, Ron will be back, And then he goes to bed. He thinks, well, maybe he's at the fraternity house. I don't know. And then he wakes up, Ron's gone, still gone, never came back. He goes to class. He runs into Richard on his way to class and says, have you seen your brother? I haven't seen him. Nope, haven't seen him. Goes to class, goes to the fraternity. Anybody seen Ron? And they're like, no, we haven't seen him. So now he's getting a little concerned. And then that night, it is the meeting of the counselors, and it's, required meeting. And he's like, I haven't seen Ron since the weekend. And that's when everything started. Okay, so then the head of the RAs basically took it upon himself, and they started contacting family members. They contacted law enforcement, so that's when the Oxford PD gets involved. Butler County Sheriff's Office gets involved. The Highway Patrol got involved. And that's when the big search is on. Okay, April 25th, which is Saturday, people students, 400 students, went all around Fisher Hall trying to find him, 3-mile radius. And then on Sunday, 3,000 acres in Houston Woods was searched. And these were by model prisoners. And again, nothing. And I just want to show you Fisher Hall. This is from the east side. You're seeing the east part. This is, Fisher Hall was like a T. And so this is the north wing. The south wing was the south entrance was really the main entrance. And then this is the east, and then on the other side, just like it, is the west. And theirs was in the west part of that, of the T. Okay, many theories were proposed. I'm going to buzz right through. Some people thought that he heard a noise in the basement, and so he went down to investigate, and a couple guys jumped him and then put him somewhere. Another, he was a target of a mafia hit. And this was, somebody had put a fish in his bed before he disappeared. And so that kind of fed that rumor because it was like, well, sleeping with the fishes kind of thing. I'll tell you who did it in a sec. The weekend prior, he was at John Carroll University, and so his father thought, this is his theory, that he might have heard something that he shouldn't have heard. And so as a result, they came down and got him. I heard a lot about, some people would tell me stories and it was, they thought it had something to do with them, He got a girl pregnant. This was something that was popular, that he got a girl pregnant and ran away. Did any of you, have you heard of these? Real? A couple, yeah. One is that maybe he committed suicide, jumped into a body of water. And then another was that he was abducted, and they did this, right? They would take a fraternity member and they'd drive him out in the middle of nowhere and dump him, and then, good luck getting back. But the one that had the most traction and the one that the university bought into was amnesia, okay? And so a week hasn't even gone by, and they're already suggesting, officials believe he might have suffered an attack of amnesia. And same with the Cleveland Plain dealer. We think it's amnesia. And the Cleveland Plain dealer actually said, what do you got to back that up? And they said, well, we don't have anything. Then we're making, this is where it gets squirrely, but we're making headlines, okay? So this is that Sunday, April 26th, amnesia's in the headline. I believe this is the Cincinnati Enquirer, but as you'll discover, not all newspapers make it into either digital or microfiche. It has to be the final edition. We only have this paper because somebody clipped it out and put it in an archive. So when you're clipping out papers, you're doing a service. And then on the 28th, they really focused on amnesia. And what we've got is a Miami professor. He's a psychology professor, Everett Patton, and he's talking about you can't get amnesia from too much studying. So don't think that. But he is all in on amnesia, as you'll soon see. He's all in. Okay, who are the investigators? Carl Knox, I mentioned him. He was the dean of men at Miami, and so they put him in charge. He was new. He was new to the position. He'd only started in 1952. So he was being broken in. And then Oscar Decker, he was the police chief. He too was new. He started his job as Oxford chief in March of 53. So he was only there a month. He'd been here in Hamilton before he went. J. Edgar Hoover, okay, the FBI, believe it or not, got involved. And, when there's a missing person, they will tell you, we do not investigate for missing people. We take missing person reports, we keep those, we'll add to them, but we're not going out, trying to find them. So yes, they had Ron's missing person. They took a call from Marjorie Tammen, got it to headquarters, so they have him on file as a missing person. That's one thing. Then Ron, because he was not filing his deferment requests, that expired. And as a result, he became a Selective Service Act violator. And so they opened up a file on that. The third thing was something that was totally off the record. And that was here in this Plain Dealer article, it talks about how Dean Carl Knox told the boys' parents that the FBI had been called into faculty conferences. That's kind of unheard of. And the thing that I think is that there was he grew up in Oxford, and he went to Miami. He was a football player. His name is Richard Hunsinger, and I have a feeling it was probably him, because he went huge into the FBI. When he retired, he was like the second in charge of the administrative division. So he a full career with the FBI. My thinking, it was probably Richard Hunsinger visiting the parents and then maybe sitting in on a meeting. Okay, one thing that the FBI had in their favor, they had his fingerprints. And this was kind of wild. Yeah, it's fluky, because Ron, when he was in the second grade, was fingerprinted. And it was simply because they lived in Fairview Village, and that particular police chief was very much into fingerprinting children. But you can't do them all, so you'd only do the second graders. And guess who was in the second grade? Ron. So it's like neither of the other two boys was fingerprinted, only Ron. And the beauty of that is, I've gone on to discover a lot about those fingerprints. And much to the FBI's chagrin, they're not happy with me. I fooled them. Okay, the reporters these are three main reporters. Yes, students would write articles much later. They would come in and write, or actually at the beginning and then later. But there were really three main reporters. The first was Gilson Wright. Do you know that name, Gilson Wright? Okay, I'm going to come a little hard on Gilson Wright. And it has to do with his job. Okay, he's a journalism professor, or at least an instructor. I don't know if he had the title professor, but he was teaching journalism courses. He was an advisory to the Miami Student. Okay, that makes sense. Director of Miami's News Bureau, that's the job where you coordinate with the press. So I used to be in this job, and not for Miami, but the reporters would call, they need something, an interview, or they need some kind of backup information, or you send them their press releases. So that's fine. It's this fourth one. He was an on-call correspondent or a stringer, okay, for these and other publications with Dayton, Hamilton, and Cincinnati. He would write articles, and they'd basically print them. It was like, here you go, here's your article. Now, it's fine if he's simply writing about scholarship, some student got a scholarship or got on the dean's list, or here's our university's doing this event, fine, who cares? When you're talking about a missing person and you're having to interview university representatives, that's not okay, because they're your boss. And so if there's something that you're trying to dig and find something, and if there's something that they don't want you to know, you're not the right person, because you're not going to be asking those probing questions. And heaven forbid if they say, no, you can't print that, or if you catch someone in a lie, someone like me is like, thank you very much, that is where we're going now, Right, that it's like lit all the way. But he would retreat. And I've caught him doing that, retreating, avoiding words, avoiding knowledge. Maurice Seeger's another one. He was for the Plain Dealer. He just wrote one article. It was a good one. But this is the guy. How many do you know this name? Joe Sella. Okay, he's the one. He was the one that kept up with this story for 23 years. So yeah, 15's bad. 23, he's got the record. But he has done he would actually work the case. Gilson Wright was writing cookie cutter articles that were blessed by the university. They never changed. Yeah, maybe he'd move them around, but that's it. Joe Cello was actually doing the work and finding new knowledge. And there was an article that he wrote in 1973 that I am benefiting from as we speak. Timeline. Okay, this is from Carl Knox's notes, okay, and I've kind of smushed it all together. Something should stand out to you as weird. 3 to 4, this is, you know how important timelines are, right? So he's got it starting at about 3. Who's not sure where he was before that. 3 to 4, he's studying psychology. Then around 7 p.m., he's in 212 Fisher, and he's helping a guy named Dick Titus study, okay? He was one of his freshman charges. Then 8 o'clock, he goes down to Mrs. Todd Hunter's. He needs new sheets. Somebody put a fish in his bed. It was not the mob. It was Dick Titus, okay? Dick Titus is a prankster, and so he had put a fish in Ron's bed. So he goes down, gets those sheets, and then we've got 2.5 hours of not sure, not sure where he is. And that's from Carl Knox. Now, what stands out to you? Does anything strike you? Yes? Yes, so very good. Why is he studying psych? Yeah. Any kid, kids don't do that. If you drop the course, you're done, right? Yeah. So, yeah. Usually done before. Yeah, right. Okay, possible sightings. On June 20th, 1953, this article was published in the Hamilton Journal-News, and it was Gilson Wright's article, okay? This is 2 months after. This woman, Clara Spivey, saw that picture and said, I think I saw him. I think he was at my door 2 months ago. And the reason that she was able to date stamp it as April 19th, because otherwise how would you know, it was because, he had a smudge on his face, and he was like, where would I be if I went in that direction? And I think he was pointing to Middletown. And she said, oh, well, you can get on the bus. And there's the bus stop over there. And then she found out that the bus had stopped that route that very night. And so as a result, she could say, yeah, that was April 19th, and he was there. Now, I don't know if it's Ron. I don't know. But it was a guy that she swears looks like him. The person that loved this story was Oscar Decker. He loved this story. And so it was ballyhooed all over the land, Miami Valley, that Mrs. Spivey, this confirms this amnesia thing. Of course he had amnesia because, he's got the smudge on his cheek and he doesn't know where he is, So they loved it. The story they didn't love was this one that happened only a little over a month later. H.H. Stevenson, Heber Hiram, or they called him Hi, Stevenson, who happened to be Director of Student Housing and Student Employment in housing. So in other words, Ron was employed by Hi Stevenson as a residence counselor. He also was in charge of issuing auto permits. Ron had a car on campus. He was one of the few. And he would have met with Hi Stevenson, okay? So Hi Stevenson's on a trip. He's coming back from Wellsville. Actually, he was, I think, further upstate. And that's Wellsville, New York. On August 5th, he walks into like an inn or a restaurant. It's both. And they sit down. He sits with his wife, and they're looking, and there's a group of men sitting at a table, and one of them looks exactly like Ron Tammen. Exactly. And he says, and it was weird, he looked at me, but then it was like he was looking through me. And he didn't say anything. Nobody knows why. Why did Hi not say anything? But he didn't. He goes out with his wife, and he says, you're not going to believe this. I think I saw Ron Tammen. And she's like, get back in there. And he goes, they're gone. Well, he goes back to work the next day, and he talks to one of the university officials, and my money is on Carl Knox because he's in room 106, Benton Hall, and Carl Knox is in room 103. So they saw each other. But here's the thing. When did we find out about Hy Stevenson? Not immediately. We found out in 1976, thanks to Joe Sella. You see why he's my idol? Yeah. For some reason, they didn't think that mattered for some reason. So, yeah, just kind of ignored it. And there were things they could have done. You know, I know it seemed like a lost moment, but, you know, you can find out where was this? Did they write a check? Did they, you know, who were those guys? Does anybody know who those guys were? Just, you could do something. Other disregarded clues. Okay, yeah. This is the article that I'm benefiting at the moment from. April 23rd, oh, you guys all know Doc Boone? Yeah. Okay, April 23rd, 1973, Joe Sella writes an article. This is the 20th anniversary. And it's about this guy, Doc Garrett Boone, who, yes, he was the coroner, yes, but he was also a family physician. And he had a story from '53 that he remembered when he read that Ron Tammen disappeared. He was like, he was here. And he went down and looked at the medical card, and he found out he was there November 19th, 1953, 5 months to the day before he disappeared. And the thing that he wanted done was he wanted his blood type taken. He wanted to know what his blood type was. And Garrett Boone thought that was a very strange request because he'd never had it before. And he said, you know, why do you want this? And he said, well, I never know. You never know when I might need to give blood one of these days. Well, as it happens, Ron Tammen did give blood. As you know, he wanted money all the time, and they were paying for blood at that point. And it was $25 a pint, which is good money back then. So yes, I have somebody who corroborates that and says, yeah, Ron and I we hitchhiked to Dayton to get, you know, give blood. But Garrett Boone, also being a county official, and knows that, you know, this could be evidence. This could be something pertaining to his disappearance. He takes that card, the medical card, and goes to the university and says, yeah, I want to talk to somebody. And he is immediately given the brush off. This is '53, right? This is right after it happens. He was told it was always discounted, didn't want to discuss the case. I feel I definitely got the brush off when there was a documentary that came out in '76. Doc Boone is quoted, and you can watch that online, by the way, and he's quoted, and he says, we exchanged sharp words. Sharp words were exchanged. Here's a guy, he's trying to help. He's a respected official, and they're not interested, okay? What is that about? So, but my favorite part of it was this, page 2, because Joe Sella, after 20 years, he'd been carrying Ron Tammen's photo in his wallet. I have seen this wallet. I've seen it. And I took a picture of his picture. He had the same, that picture was with all of Joe Sella's kids. So it's like it was one of those extra kid. And they published it, and April 23rd, 1973, somebody saw that, and they called the FBI. And it was somebody from the area, and they said, I know where this guy is. He's at Welco Industries in Blue Ash, Ohio. And so the Cincinnati FBI took it down. They drove to Blue Ash. They fingerprinted that guy. I've talked to that guy's daughter, by the way. She's like, I had no idea. And they came back and said, yeah, that's not Ron Tammen. But that whole act of an anonymous caller, Joe Sella publishing this, and an anonymous caller calling it in, and then the FBI following up, created all kinds of new clues for me, what I'm working on right at the moment. I'll just cut to the chase and say, there's scribbles all over Ron's FBI documents, many of which I think came in 1973. So, and then lastly, I'm just gonna buzz through this. There was a dead body. I remember in 2008, Do you remember that when there was a dead body in Georgia and they thought, oh, what if it's Ron? Well, the university was let known about this in 1955. They were told about this dead body in 1955 by the Georgia Bureau of Investigation. And from what I can tell, nothing happened, even though they could have, this is the director of the GBI and says, can you send me everything you have on Ron Tammen? Because we think it might be him. And I don't know if they phone called or what, but the easiest thing would be put them in touch with the FBI because the FBI had his fingerprints. They could have easily solved that mystery right then and there in 1955. But it had to wait. Here's why it was a straight shot. The dead body was off of 27, and that goes through Oxford. You know, it's High Street. And so if he had amnesia, he could have wandered there and hitchhiked. He was a hitchhiker, and boom, gotten into some trouble. So it was possible. And these are the guys that called. Frank Smith he was the cold case detective for Butler County who was making the headlines here. And so these guys, Steve Wilson is the sheriff for Walker County, Georgia, and they're the ones who finally solved the case through DNA. Unfortunately, it was not Ron Tammen, but that is closed now. They still are trying to figure out who that dead body was, by the way. And they call me sometimes. They're like, we're going to do this. Okay, latest findings. Disclaimer is, I'm naming names, but please know that I don't hold grudges against people that were withholding information at that point. They're like doing their job, maybe even Gilson Wright, okay? He was doing his job, and if somebody's cautioning you and saying, this is for national security, you should not include that, you know, okay, it was a different time then. Also, I am presenting evidence, but I'm also giving some hypotheses, and I'm trying to keep it very clear to you what is evidence and what is hypothesis. One of my tools is the Freedom of Information Act. I use it all the time. And what that is, it's FOIA for short, and you file requests for federal documents. You have to know what you want. You have to know what you're asking for. It has to be in document form. I was terrible when I started. I'm not half bad now, okay? 15 years later, you know. You can also, thankfully, Ohio is a sunshine state, and you can ask for public records from public institutions, and I do. And Miami University is one of the institutions that I frequently submit requests for. Get to know Ron's family. Unfortunately, this is Marcia and Robert. John, I spoke with John I was allowed to speak to him 3 days. He was kind of an interesting fellow, but he was basically, I will talk to you for 3 days and then we are done talking. Fine. These two, they were we'd call each other all the time, you know, and I'm not much of a phone person, but whenever I saw Marcia Tammen or Robert Tammen on my phone, it was I always pick up, always. And they just say, yeah, I was thinking, you know, and they tell me something. And then here are some folks who had something to share with the story. And basically, this person is related to one of my person of interest. This person was a former cop at Oxford PD. He worked for Oscar Decker. I dropped everything to go see him. He's 97 and he died 5 months later. Yeah, you do. You just, okay, I'm there. And then Bob Schutte, he used to own the Purity, and I don't know if you know that name. He recently passed too. That's the hardest part of this job, when you find out that somebody's passed. Okay, and then I spend a ton of time in archives, libraries, historical societies, and this is where I met Brian when I was here looking up some things. I go on a ton of road trips and rabbit holes. Okay, I'm going to play, this is so important. We need to revise the timeline because when Carl Knox had that 2.5-hour gap, it's like, what's going on? And then I talked to somebody and he filled the gap 100%. And so I'm going to play that for you. Now,
So tell me a little more about, did you ever socialize with him?
No.
Okay.
I didn't. The only times that I really saw him were really at song practices.
Okay.
And he was the leader of the song practice. Are you familiar with the fact in those days we had a Mother's Day program where all the fraternities used to sing a song competitively in Withrow Court?
Okay, no.
Okay, that ended before you got there, but that was a major thing. I mean, every fraternity practiced for that. You picked a song, and you had a song leader, and the only guy that could carry a tune or knew anything about music in the Dell House was Ron. Literally, and he'd have a little pitch pipe, and he'd start us off in the right direction, and so on.
Okay.
And the night he disappeared, we had a song practice. You probably know that.
No, I don't. I do not know that.
Oh, okay. Okay, I have looked since I talked to you. I've looked at the websites. I'm not sure which one is yours, but there's some information in some of them that doesn't jive with my memory.
Okay.
And I'll tell you as we go along here. But for example, there's a discussion that he came back to his room at 8:30 at night. Now, if he did that before he came to song practice, because there was a song practice that normally sometimes it started at 9 o'clock at night, sometimes it started at 10 o'clock. Most often it started at 10 because that was the girls' hours.
Okay.
When the girls had to be in the dorms at 10, the song practice in our fraternity started at 10 or maybe 10 minutes after 10. But sometimes if the guys didn't have a lot of dates and they wanted to go quick, we'd start at 9. I can't remember which was the case that night. I don't know.
But was he? But you do remember? You do remember that he was at practice?
There's no question he did. I walked home with him. There were the two of us, Chip Anderson and myself. When that song practice was over, we had a house chef, a black guy that we used to call Daddy-O. He lived outside of town. And the nights of song practice, he would come in and he'd make hamburgers for the guys before we broke up for the night. So what happened that night was we had the song practice. Daddy-O made hamburgers for us, and when then we all broke up. When we left the house, there's a guy named Chip Anderson, who is now deceased, and myself and Ron walked. At that time, there was a path in front of the Dell House on the far side between the natatorium and Withrow Court, which is gone, by the way. Did you know that?
Yeah, I did.
Withrow Court is gone. That's a heartbreak.
Yeah.
I lived in Withrow Court. But anyway, we walked on that path across what is now the baseball field, right straight across, and came out right by Sims Hall. And Chip and I lived in Sims Hall when we lived in that first door at Sims. We said goodnight to him, and he walked on. And as far as we know, Dean Knox told me we were probably the last ones that he knows that saw him.
Really? This is so counter to what, how everybody, actually how it's been reported in the news too, because they basically said between 8 and 9 he probably disappeared and he had gone to get sheets because of the fish.
No, I saw that in the website, back to his room at 8:30.
Yeah.
Now, it's possible that he was back in his room at 8:30, but the point is that if he was there at 8:30, that wasn't in for the night. He had left and come back out to the Dell House to the song practice.
Oh, that's fascinating.
I can't tell you that he didn't come in at 8:30 and then leave, but he definitely was not home at 8:30 from the song practice.
Yeah.
There's no question. He wasn't back before 10:30.
Right. Okay. So now you're thinking, Carl Knox told him that he was probably the last person to see him alive, and yet, or before he disappeared, and yet he forgot about that?
Now,
okay, sorry. Okay, and here's Logan Corbin, my policeman friend. I'm going to just cut him off because the clue that he gives us, it was never investigated. But wait till you hear what this clue was.
When did you find out about the woman of him talking to a woman or sitting in a car?
I think that next day or so.
Somebody told that he saw Ron Tammen in a car with a woman.
Yeah, but they haven't investigated the person. Nobody knows who the person is sitting at. Whether it was a fake deal to cover up or what. But they definitely said that he was in a car. They saw him in a car about 45 minutes, close to an hour. Then all of a sudden they just drove off.
When did you find?
Sorry. Okay, so that was never investigated. He's sitting in a car with a woman and they drive off and they don't. And that's what the rest of that tape is me going, do you know what color car? Do you know what kind of car? Who was the woman? And they said it was a woman from Hamilton. But who really knows? Yeah, Hamilton. But there's a lot that they could have done. Yeah, maybe it was simply hearsay, but there is stuff you can do. Did you see a woman in a car? You know, that kind of thing. All right, so we're going to revise our timeline now based on that new info, plus additional. I know what he was doing in the morning. He was at King Records in Cincinnati cutting records with the Campus Owls. They were going to enter it into a contest. So he comes back, then he's studying psychology, helping Dick Titus, getting sheets, and now we've got it. He was at song practice from, my source couldn't remember, but that was, 60-some years ago when we talked, and so we've got this block. Either it started at 9 or it started at 10. It doesn't matter. It's the whole block. Because then my friend Logan Corbin said that he never gave a time. He said it was late at night. It was late at night. There was a woman in a car. He was sitting there. So it could have been that when Chuck came, Ron might have been out in the car. Okay? We don't know when this car drove off. We don't. But I think by the time, okay, I think that is how Ron Tammen left campus. I don't think he was wandering around in a haze. Okay, so why would they disregard those? You heard that guy, right? Didn't he sound credible? He was the one that gave me Logan Corbin's name. This is after how many years? And he's like, I wonder if Logan Corbin's alive. You should check into him. We used to play cards with him, that kind of thing. So he was very credible to me. Okay, why would they disregard the walk home? Why would they disregard the woman in the car? And now we're going to talk about that visitor on Mrs. Spivey's doorstep. This is same pub date. This came out on June 29th, 1953. It was telling the Miami Valley about this visitor at Mrs. Spivey's house. And it's the same reporter because it's the same article that's been, juggled. And that's Gilson Wright. This is 4 papers. I'm sure there were others. And then we've got 2 different arrival times, the same date, same reporter, 2 arrival times. So I've done it in black and red. Hamilton Journal News and the Dayton Daily News, it's 11 o'clock, okay? And they attribute this to Mrs. Spivey directly. Mrs. Spivey said the youth came at around about 11 o'clock. She said it. And they've interviewed her. She's got quotes in this. Here's a quote to Mrs. Spivey. So you presume he's been talking to her. Gilson has. And then over here, we've got the Dayton Journal Herald. And this, again, not sure, I think it's the Cincinnati Enquirer. And they say it's about midnight. This one attributes it to Mrs. Carl Spivey, but in a roundabout way. It's not Mrs. Spivey said, it's Mrs. Spivey remembered last week, blah, blah, blah. It was about midnight, okay? This one is attributed directly to Oscar Decker. And what he's saying is, Mrs. Spivey said it was about midnight, even though Gilson heard it from the horse's mouth, if I could be so bold. He heard Mrs. Spivey say about 11 o'clock. Why? Okay, why change the time frame? Okay, why change that hour for this visitor that we don't even know if it was Ron or not? And I can give it to you in one word. They liked that amnesia theory a lot. They liked it a lot. And so it would be way harder to explain if they said it was amnesia, but with that walk home, here's why it would be so weird. Because here's the Delt house right here, Talawanda. And I think he said they walked through the baseball field or something. And here's Sims Hall, and here's Fisher Hall. And if you've seen that area, the Markham Center now, it's probably 2 minutes walk. It's so close. So how could he get amnesia between Sims Hall, right? I mean, that would be really hard-pressed to explain. I think the other thing is they don't want him here, spotted here, because of that car thing. All of a sudden, it wasn't clear who said there was a woman in a car. But if you're placing him right around here, all of a sudden that might jog people's memories, okay? So I think they wanted him not there, and by they I'm talking university plus Oscar Decker. I think they wanted him in somewhere in Fisher Hall all by himself. Nobody seeing him, okay? Now as far as that changing of the time, have you ever driven from the Markham Center to 7 Mile? And I mean, you know what, that's 73, I think it's like this, and there are a couple jogs. Now try to imagine a guy who doesn't have, he has no memory of who he is. He's just wandering, right? Can you make it in 2.5 hours? I'm a slight runner. I'm like a walk runner, intermediate runner. You'd have to be running really, full on. And you'd almost have to know that you wanted to go to Mrs. Spivey's house. I mean, it was like, this is not aimless, right? I think Oscar Decker knew 2.5 hours is tight. And so he gave him an extra hour to make it a little more feasible. And that's the time, unfortunately, that lived on, about midnight. The university even has it the next morning on their website. Or at least that's how it was when I spoke with somebody a couple months ago. Whoopsie. Okay, let's talk about the psychology book. So, like we said, very strange to be reading psychology once you've dropped the course. Carl Knox thought this was weird as well. And so he wrote down 3 names in his notes. These were clearly people he wanted to talk to. And one was Professor Dennison. He was Ron's advisor. He was the one who would sign off those withdrawal tickets. So he would have approved that. He knew exactly what was going on with his academics. Professor Delp and Professor Switzer were in the psychology department. So, I think Carl wanted to have a word and find out. Something else Carl did, and I'm thankful, is he wrote down what it was open to. He said the book was open to habits. And I wish he would have put down it would have been really helpful if he would have just put down the page, put down the page number. But he made it a little harder for me, but that's okay. Note that it's all caps and underlined, habits. So I got the book, the edition that I thought it would be, and I looked for habits. I figured the word would not be down in the gray stuff. It would be somewhere here, okay, where you could see it. And so I found things, there's section heads, and there are what I call, and I'm calling them this, and subheads. So a section head, all caps. A subhead would be not all caps, it's bolded, okay? And I found 4 page spreads where habits was mentioned either as a section head or a subhead. 4. So that's like 8 pages from a over 600 page book. So he did help a lot. So I found, now because he capitalized habits, I have to presume, I'm doing some presuming, I have to presume that he was looking at a section head versus a subhead. So that subtracted 2 pages. So now I've got 3 2-page spreads. And then I looked at the book itself. And this is another presumption. The book is open, I believe, that is what it was open to when Ron disappeared, okay? I believe that, A, because they locked down the room and Chuck Finley had to go live elsewhere, but also I believe that the Hamilton Journal-News is a good, reputable paper, and Joe Sella is a good, reputable journalist. And I think they wanted it, they didn't want to recreate it. I think that we are looking at what it looked like. And why is that important to me? It's because I'm not seeing any images on that left side. And those other 3 two-page spreads, there were the 2 of them did have very obvious images. And we would have seen shadowing or something, I think. So which leads me to thinking, this is the page that he was one of them, 294, page 294. But I think he wasn't reading about habits. I think he was reading about post-hypnotic suggestion. Okay, that seems a little strange. You know, really? Okay, yeah, it's not that far-fetched. Because, as it so happens, Miami had 3 very, very high-level hypnosis experts on their faculty in psychology at the time of Ron Tammen's disappearance. You have Everett Patton, who was the department chair. You have St. Clair Switzer and Ted Perrin. Everett Patton, they all studied under the preeminent hypnosis researcher. His name was Clark Hull, Hull, and he was at University of Wisconsin during the 20s, and then he moved over to Yale in the 30s. And so Everett studied under him for bachelor and master, and then St. Clair did a master's at Wisconsin, and then he moved over to Yale for his PhD. And then Ted Perrin was at Yale for his PhD. So all of them studied under Hull. Clark Hull wrote, he was an excellent, renowned psychologist, and he studied learning and aptitude and conditioned behavior. But he got into hypnosis for a little while there, and for 10 years they conducted research into hypnosis. And the people who helped him were Everett Patton, among these, Everett Patton and St. Clair Switzer. These are alphabetical. If they put it in order of how important they were, they'd be up at the top. Because Everett Patton was helping with experiments even at the end, because Clark Hull at Yale, they wanted him to kind of calm down with all the hypnosis stuff. And so Everett Patton was helping him finish that. St. Clair Switzer at that time was helping produce the book. So they were cherished people to Clark Hull. All right. So another reason that isn't far-fetched that he's talking, that he would be studying post-hypnotic suggestion is, I was getting all kinds of clues from this man, Everett Patton. He was being interviewed by Gilson Wright and talking about amnesia, and this is that not caused by overstudy. So here's what Everett Patton did. He let us know he refused to talk about Ron Tammen's case, which is always, as soon as somebody refuses to talk, that's, oh, you must know something then. But he says if he's alive, it's probably at some distance from Oxford. Okay. He then spends the rest of the article talking about this very special condition where someone forgets who they are and goes wandering. And that is called dissociative fugue. Okay. Very rare. He's talking about this, and he calls it, it's a psychological condition. And you have to know the person's psychology before you even know where they're going to go or what they're going to do. So he's really talking. And yet, he's saying that he's not talking about Ron Tammen, but he also says he's probably at some distance from here, which sounds to me like he's forgotten who he is and gone wandering, okay? Well, that's exactly what he thinks. Because I found another person who was a psychology major, and he knew Everett Patton. He's still living. And he read something, an article somewhere, that talked about Everett Patton was leading a faculty panel, and that panel came to the consensus that Ron had dissociated and forgot who he was and went wandering. And this guy, I have tried to find that article, I have tried, and I can't, but he is credible. And so this guy walked up to Everett Patton, knowing him, and said, I read this, do you think this? And he said, well, there were things in Ron's background that would be consistent with that, yes. And he said, what kinds of things? And he said, well, I can't comment on that. So again, we know he knows something, and he thinks it's this extremely rare condition. Okay, I'm going to now give you a very short course in amnesia, because I had to do it. You know, it's like all of a sudden, they started it, they're talking about amnesia. Okay, very quick, there are two kinds of amnesia. There's organic amnesia, and that is the most common by far. And that is caused by when something injures the brain. So it might be by trauma, it might be by disease, okay? It might be a stroke, but the brain is injured. It's like, and the thing about this one, you don't forget who you are, okay? You don't forget who you are, you don't go wandering. You just have trouble categorizing memories, all right? The new memories that come in, sometimes you have trouble retrieving them. You know how before my grandmother died, all the new memories were kind of gone. But all that old stuff from when she was a child, she remembered it clear as a bell. Okay, that's kind of this. Psychogenic, functional, or dissociative, all different, names. Nothing is wrong with the brain. It happens because of trauma, emotional trauma. And it's your brain's way of protecting you so that you can survive. If something horrible happened to you, you don't have to think about it. Your brain has forgotten it for you, so it's not accessible. Very rare, and according to the American Psychiatric Association, 1.8% of the world's population would have it in a given year. Okay, the person I spoke with, I had to talk with an amnesia expert, and he said, let's see, in 38 years of my working, meeting with amnesia patients, I can probably put my hand on 12 that I recall. He's seen thousands of patients. 12. All right. There's one other kind of amnesia, and that's post-hypnotic amnesia. It has been likened to psychogenic amnesia because nothing is wrong with the brain. You're not forgetting because of emotional trauma. You're forgetting because somebody told you to forget. Okay, and it has been considered a laboratory model of psychogenic amnesia. All right, so back to this article that, thank heavens for the person who clipped it out. This is I love, you usually lead with the hardcore stuff and, go to the lesser stuff, that inverted V. And what they led, with all the stuff about the Houston Woods and blah, blah, blah. And then they come here and say, parents of 3 other Ohio youths who have disappeared in recent years, but who recovered from their loss of memory, have telephoned to Tammen's parents to encourage them. It was learned here. When I first read that, I'm like, so knowing what we know about how rare it is for somebody to forget who they are. I mean, they're basically comparing this to Ron's case. They had him call the parents. To forget who you are and to go wandering, and how rare that is. How is it that somebody, the week of Ron's disappearance, is able to go to 3 people, you, and you, let's call the parents and say that, you guys went wandering because you forgot who you were, okay? I don't think we're talking about dissociative amnesia, psychogenic, we're not. I think we're talking about post-hypnotic amnesia. So that's the issue. And also, I think, I'm hypothesizing, Everett Patton was probably the person who provided that info. I think he was hypnotizing those students. And I'm going to go ahead and say it. I think they were probably Miami students. So that's my hypothesis. I think that Ron Tammen was being hypnotized on a recurring basis by Miami's psychology department at the time of his disappearance. Now, yeah, this is going to get wild. I mean, what are we doing now? Okay. Now, Gilson Wright. We know Gilson wrote this because I found another version of the article, but guess what? Those last two paragraphs never saw the light of day again. Okay? So this is the only thing that made it, and then Gilson, in all of his articles that he wrote, never mentioned that. And I want to tell you something else about Gilson, with psychology being so important, all right? It's all about, he's interviewing the psychologists. And in 1954, when those pictures were published, Joe Sella had identified that the book, there was one book on the desk that was open, it was psychology. Joe Sella made that known. Everybody who mentioned the psychology book was Sella. Every time he wrote about it, it was psychology. And then Marie Seeger wrote about the psychology book. But here's Gilson Wright's articles. They're all in black, so you can see he did a lion's share of them. They were all the same. Never, ever did he mention the word psychology when talking about the book. And here, okay, we'll give him, a pass on all this, but after Joe Sella identifies it for the same paper that he writes for, it's like he's, fighting it, I don't want to mention that it's a psychology book. And here you go. He left his books open. He pluralizes them. Books, books, books. Hypothesis. I think Gilson Wright was cautioned by university administrators not to mention that psychology book, and also not to repeat the detail about the 3 youths. So he did a little journalism there, got that, and they're like, yeah, no more. That they knew how damning. Oh my gosh, can you imagine what Joe Sella would have done with that information, knowing that 3 kids had lost their memories? I mean, it's like, what's going on? Okay, so now I'm interested in the psychology department, really interested, but I haven't settled on. Everett Patton, he was saying a lot and doing a lot, but I hadn't settled on Patton yet. I had known a little bit in just my own background. I knew about, anybody heard of MK Ultra? Yeah. Okay, the time frame is like, MK Ultra was the CIA's mind control program, all right? And that's what it says behavioral modification. Most people know it as the mind control. They were using hypnosis, they were using drugs, LSD, they were doing all kinds of things to people unwittingly to try to control their behavior, okay? So I knew that was going on. In fact, MK Ultra was green-lighted the same week that Ron Tammen disappeared, April 13th, 1953. The other thing that was learning about was Project Artichoke, which is part of MK Ultra, but it was more specific to interrogation. And it was using hypnosis and drugs to to get more information out of POWs that we capture. Is there a way that we can get, more information? But is there also a way to prevent people that, like our airmen, our soldiers, from giving up our secrets? And can we use hypnosis and drugs in this regard? Search for the Manchurian Candidate was a book that was written that brought all this out. And if you're really interested, I highly encourage it. John Marks was the one who filed the first FOIA requests to get the documents that I'm benefiting from at the moment. So basically, I had 2 questions. Okay, that's happening in 1953. They're very interested in hypnosis. Is it possible that the CIA went to Miami and asked them for some help? And if so, did Miami professors say yes? And if so, does that contribute to Ron Tammen's disappearance? It's getting weird, right? All right, and then I find this. And then I find this. And this takes a lot of digging. But this was a memo written March 25th, 1952, about a year before Tammen disappeared. And it was basically a guy who was boots on the ground, Morse Allen, in the CIA. And he was going to his superior and said, you want some experts. I've got experts. Okay? And we have 2, 3, and 4 as far as paragraphs. In paragraph 2, I will cut to the chase. He's talking about Clark Hall. Okay, because he's talking about this work, this classic work on hypnosis. It's the must read, okay? He's feeble. They say, A, he doesn't want to do hypnosis anymore. Yeah, we know that. Yale made sure. But also, he's feeble. By feeble, they mean he's sickly. And so he did, in fact, die like in May of 52. But he had some assistants, his 2 best assistants. And here we go, 2, 3. And unfortunately, they redacted so much blank before he became a psychologist. At the present time, he serves as a blank. I mean, they give us nothing except this. This was where they failed, and that is he has plenty of experience in research, experimental, clinical, and business psychology. Business psychology, that was it. That was it, my clue. Because St. Clair Switzer at Miami developed the business psychology course. Clark Hall was not developing business psychologists. That's not what he was doing. But it just so happened that St. Clair Switzer was at a school that did not have a graduate program at that point. And yeah, he had to do that. That was part of his job. Thank you for including that, because all of a sudden, okay. Now, the other thing is that they said any problem dealing with hypnotism and drugs. Drugs? Okay, drugs. What did St. Clair Switzer have to do with drugs? I'm going to jump to that now. This person is not Patton. I thought it might be Patton, but it's Griffith Williams, who was a hypnosis expert at Rutgers. Here's St. Clair Switzer, hypnosis expert under Clark Hall. Great. He earned a pharmacy degree before he went to school for his bachelor's in psychology. He was a pharmacist. He was a registered pharmacist all through his career. And he used to brag about it. I saw things, late in his career. He hadn't done pharmacy forever, but he maintained that. And that's why they called him Doc Switzer, by the way. They said it because of his pharmacy degree. He developed the business psychology course. And then lastly, he was a lieutenant colonel in the Air Force Reserves all the way through while he was teaching. And so he would go on active duty, too, during that time. The military and the CIA were working together on Project Artichoke. And that is what I think they recruited him. So think about it. Here's this guy. He's at arm's length from Ron Tammen, and he's working for Project Artichoke. Another memo that I think he is named in is this one. It's on interrogation techniques. So again, we're talking Project Artichoke. January 14th of 53, just months before Ron disappears. This is kind of a scattered memo. I only need this 3rd paragraph. And it says, if the services of major, and thankfully they didn't do one of those big whiteout things. They just went like that, and you can actually see the letters. Name deleted, USAF MC Medical Corps, a trained hypnotist. I added the comma because it drove me crazy. They write horribly, by the way. Can be obtained, and another man well-grounded in conventional psychological interrogation and polygraph techniques, and the services of Lieutenant Colonel blank. A well-balanced interrogation research center could be established in an especially selected location. I think This guy, and many people think this guy in the MK Ultra research world, is Louis Jolyon West. Louis Jolyon West is famous and infamous for MK Ultra research. Look him up when you get home. He killed an elephant once with LSD. I'll just simply say that. Yeah. Louis Jolyon West. And he was, and people, you can see the L, the O, the U, the I. You can see the dot of the I. Okay? J. West. And this, everybody's been like, all the researchers, not sure who it is. I think we know who it is because I can see the S, the W, there's the dot to the I, T, this is a Z, E, R. I'm positive that's Switzer. And to be mentioned in the same paragraph as Louis Jolyon West, it's big. It's big. Lastly, I know they were doing hypnosis studies at Miami because I have another source, still living, who went on to psychiatry, by the way. And he remembered a time, it was the beginning, he was a counselor with Ron at Fisher Hall in the September when they were just arriving, and everybody was kind of out on the grounds. And he comes out and he's excited. He's excited because he wants to be trained to be a counselor. And he sees several guys standing out on the lawn, or it was either the lawn or the front porch. And this is the south end, so that's the front of the building. And they're talking, and he figures they look weird because they're wearing like jackets. They don't look like professors, they don't look like students. Sounds like they look preppy, okay? And they're talking, and he walks up to him, hey, my name's so-and-so, and I'm gonna be a counselor. And they just all looked at him and just nothing. They said nothing. And he was so humiliated, you know. He was so humiliated, he still tells me, you know, it was painful. He's an extrovert, you know, it's painful. He goes and he sees somebody nearby, and he's like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I just did that. And he's like, what are they talking about? And he said, they're recruiting for hypnosis studies in the psychology department. They want to, you know, and he was like, you remember that because he wanted to learn hypnosis, because he wanted to be a psychiatrist. And so then he went to, he was, you know, he was never going to go back to that group. So he went to Everett Patton, who he was taking a class from, and he said, hey, I hear you're recruiting for a hypnosis program. And Everett Patton was like, where did you get that information? He goes, we don't have a curriculum in hypnosis. And he said, yeah, but I heard you were recruiting volunteers. I'm interested. He said, well, maybe in the future, I don't know. And that was it. He shut him down. No comment, right? So my hypothesis is, I think that St. Clair Switzer was assisting the CIA with Project Artichoke in 1953, and he had something to do with Ron Tammen's disappearance. Okay. Oh, good. We're going to get to this. You guys are getting a better talk, if I can say, because we're finally getting to the good stuff. Let's talk about those fingerprints, right? Okay, so Cleveland Field Office sends in Marjorie Tammen's write-up. They come back and they say the FBI identified him as 358406B, but they say we've got his fingerprints, okay? We have them. Joe Sella submits his 20th anniversary article, and there's the picture, and that same day, somebody, an anonymous caller, says, that's the guy from Welco Industries, I know him. They still had his fingerprints then because they came back and, oh, well, we compared them and they're not the same guy. Okay, so we've got his prints, we compared them, not the same. In 2008, when they were digging up the dead body and comparing, right, Frank Smith contacts them and says, could you please send me his prints? Now, he shouldn't have to do that because now they can bring up prints immediately. right, that's digitized. So he had them do a hand search, and they came back and said, yeah, we looked everywhere, they're not here. Now here's the thing, FBI and law enforcement are supposed to be like this team. They didn't give him any additional information. Just, oh yeah, we don't have them. So I come along, April 2015, and I'm oblivious. I don't know what I'm getting into, and I'm like, yeah, did you guys throw away his prints in 1973? What's that about? He comes back and he says, we ran the FBI number and discovered it was expunged from our system in 2002. No other info available. They always say it like that. Well, the way he said it was, we ran that number. And I'm like, are you saying you had his prints and you threw them away in 2002? And he's like, yes, that is correct. No other info available. Then I was like, well, when do you guys expunge prints? And he said, when they are 110 years or 7 years after confirmed death. And I'm like, oh, well, I mean, he was 68 or 69. He wasn't 110. So that means he must have died in 1995. And I guess, and I called their public information office and saying, hey, yeah, can you confirm, did Ron Tammen die in 1995? And her answer was, we don't have to answer. Oh, they don't, I mean, just look, anytime they ask the FBI anything, they're like, yeah, they didn't comment. Anyway, so I'm in the dark. And I'm like, well, I never felt confident that when he died or anything. And then I learned more about how long they kept prints. And he was right that they kept them until like 110 years, but that was when we were talking in 2015. But in 2002, they were keeping them for 99 years. And here's the other kicker that he never mentioned. 99 years or 7 years after confirmed death, whichever is later. What that means is, it doesn't matter when he died. He could have died in, 1995. They should have kept them for 99 years. He's born in 1933. They should still have him 2032. And so I reported them. There is an office in the National Archives that they oversee. Are they dispensing of records too early? And I couldn't believe it. I wrote this email that was like, the FBI threw their Ron Tammen's prints too soon. And they came back 1 month later. And what they said was, no, it's fine, because it's due to this N1065883 that they can do that. And I'm like, oh, that, And they're like, and then I said, well, and then of course, do they say no information? Yeah, does not have further information. We don't, and I said, well, send me what you got. What did the FBI send you? And I think they sent me to the FBI, but I got this FBI's email. And it was June of 2002, when they did their big expungement. Okay. So what is that? You look it up, and this is, they could do it because it was in conflict with the Privacy Act of 1974 or a court order. The Privacy Act of 1974 is for our protection. If we ever feel that a federal agency has our data and that was kind of illegally gotten, let's say, remember when the FBI was doing their electronic surveillance stuff, and yeah, they were getting information in an ill-gotten way. You can request that that information be expunged, okay? Or they have to make it complicated and say, or it could be a court order. So I did have to chase that down, and I contacted the Attorney General of Ohio and said, because it was Cleveland was the office of origin, I said, did you have a court order on the books or something? And they came back and said no. And also, I do know that the Privacy Act is by far the most common reason that that people expunge that information. And then Here's a memo from 1998, not far from 2002, and it's telling people this is in, and it has to do with the expungement of records. The only person who can make a request for amendment correction is the subject of the record. So what does that tell you? It tells me that he was alive in 2002. They expunged Ron's records in 2002 because of the Privacy Act, and if so, it was Ron that requested it. Yeah. As long as the FBI was following their own rules. I mean, I have to have some little wiggle room here, right? But I think he was alive. Okay, last couple of things. We're doing so well. Gosh. Yeah. So during lockdown, COVID, right? Often I will go to like libraries and stuff and just snap pictures and of documents. And then, you know, when I have time, I'll go through it. Well, during lockdown, I had time. So I found this document at University Archives, and it has to do with an interview with Carl Knox's secretary. And it was recent. I mean, this is what that thing looks like. This is not an onion skin. This is, you know, this is a laser printer paper. And this woman, I do know for a fact that she lived a very long life, and she passed away in 2020. So I have the feeling that it was done relatively recently, and by relatively, I think 20 years, within the last 20 years, right? The thing that I love is that they installed a button under her desk for whenever calls came in, which was like, and then also, this is my favorite, she was given a list of words that she should not speak in front of a reporter. You know, I'm sorry, but I think psychology is one of those. I think hypnosis is one of those. I don't know. We'll see. But I would love to know what words were not allowed. I have been, well, this is my news. I've got breaking news, okay? Okay. And I am restricted from saying anything other, no questions, okay? No comments after this. But I'm attempting to obtain records from Miami University that may be pertinent to the case. I filed a writ of mandamus against Miami University on December 31st, 2023, over a year ago, at the Court of Common Pleas of Butler County, Ohio. Miami University filed a motion to dismiss the case. Their motion was denied. And we are now in discovery period. We're still waiting for information about how the university creates and maintains these records, and we're scheduled for a deposition of a university representative on May 14th, and that is what I am permitted to say. Okay, so now I'm going to show you a little bit what I've reaped benefits from Joe Sella's 1973 article. So when that article came in, I think the FBI was rediscovering Ron's case. J. Edgar Hoover had died 1 year earlier, and I have a feeling he might have had his, you know, he had these secret rooms where things with sensitive information was kept, and I have a feeling he was he or one of his persons was keeping an eye on Ron's case. I think there was sensitive stuff. It was the missing person file room, which nobody I was talking to had any idea what that was. That wasn't the normal protocol for missing persons. Anyway, so I'm looking at, you know, usually when I looked at these documents first, I was concentrating on the actual words. Now I'm concentrating on stamps and scribbles, and they're telling me a lot. This is what his documents look like. You can see the stamps and scribbles, okay? Okay, so the first thing I did was I started concentrating on, here's ST-102. ST-102 was a stamp, and I just Googled it. And thankfully that kind of translates in Google. Google picked up on it. They don't like the scribbles, but, and then I also noticed an REC-19. Okay. I laid these out. I noticed other people's ST-102s, and then I laid them out by REC numbers. And what do you know? I mean, JFK's listed a lot. People associated with Santo Trafficante, David Ferry, Cuban Revolutionary Board, Salvatore Granello. These all are ST-102s. There are also other ST stamps, ST-100. It starts at 100 and then goes up. Down closer to 100, it seems a lot more, a lot more dangerous kind of people. All right? And there's Ron Tammen sitting there. Yeah. ST-19. And who also has 19? James McCord. James McCord. Not all of his documents are ST-102, REC-19, but about 20 I could find that of his documents are the same. And this is roughly the same period. James McCord, as you know, was one of the Watergate burglars. And he and Frank Sturgis and E. Howard Hunt, and this was Watergate. And why is Ron Tammen's documents? Okay, so there you can see his REC, ST-102, REC-19. Another thing is this thing. It looks like LB, but I think it's LF. Ron has them on 4 of his documents. So does James McCord. He's got them on like all through the time that they're, his is a big, I don't know how many. He's got a bunch. And it's the same period that somebody's signing that is doing it to James McCord's records too. Hank Greenspun, he was a publisher of the Las Vegas Sun. He got into he did some bad things, trouble. The reason this is here is because the White House burglars were going to burglarize his office. They didn't do it, but he gets one. And do you know Daniel Ellsberg? He's a good guy, okay? Daniel Ellsberg's a good guy. He was the Pentagon Papers leaker, and he, by bringing out the truth, brought the Vietnam War closer to the end. And so Nixon was mad. He sent the White House burglars to his psychiatrist, Louis Fielding. And guess what? We get one of those. So it sounds like James McCord had something to do with, I don't know. I'm still figuring it out. Did they know each other? Was Ron working for James McCord? Was Ron, at the Watergate? I don't know. But this is the vindicator. This is like all this work, where people think I'm a kook, and right? And like, okay, I'll drive it. Okay, it's this. Right in the left margin of his document, you can see where you'd ignore it because I can't even read it. But then you put it down like this. This says C index. It's not well written, but that's what it says, C index. C index, what's that? Ron Tammen, and I'm saying it, I'm 99.99% sure, was on the FBI's security index. The FBI's security index was an index that they created so that they would be able to round up people that they considered dangerous or a national security threat. And in the event of a national emergency, we'll round these people up. There were about 10,000 of them. Some weren't bad people, by the way. They had broad definitions of who these people are. Communists, socialists, okay, but then also we have these 2 spies. Charles Manson was on the index. Yeah, so they had murderers. And this guy was Martin Luther King's speechwriter. They called him a communist. But the whole point was to keep track of them. So here's what they would do. Okay, so you had to be on the radar. You couldn't just be a missing person. They had to know how to get in touch with you. And what they would do is they would fill out a form, FD-122, and they'd send it to they'd all sign off, and then they'd send it to the Department of Justice, and they'd look at it and say, okay, yeah, let's add them to the index. And then they would have to keep track of this person. And because they were keeping track, and that's like every 6 months or so, they would make sure they knew this person's address. They had the people's address. So this thing about the FBI not knowing, we don't know, you know, they knew. They knew where he was. They were keeping track of him. Okay, and this is how, if you're wondering, are you sure C-index means security index? First of all, the security index was the index. Yes, they had a bunch of indexes, but the security index was the top, okay? The one that they never talked about. Also, they had to have some system to know if somebody's on the security index because their record-keeping system kept it totally separate. The security index cards were kept in a totally different area. It was very confidential. Not everybody, you couldn't just waltz in anybody and go rifling through the security index. So what they would do is very discreetly write, I believe, C-index on those documents. And that's what we have here. So we have this person's, Harry Hay was a gay activist. He has an FD 122, and there's his C-index. Morton Sobel, he doesn't have an FD 1. I have to only use what's actually posted. So this says it's a security index card, so it's not that form, but it lets you know he's on this security index, and here's C-index. Same for Judith Copland, another spy. Hard to read, but that's C-index. Okay, and then thankfully, we also have Stanley Levine, and they have one FD 122. He's a communist, and they have C-index. So Ron Tammen, yeah, I just think that's huge. And when do you think he was added? My theory is, so here's this is, who is this? Hank Greenspun, the same guy, the Las Vegas publisher. Here's his C-index. It looks very similar. It looks like the same person wrote that. My thinking, because this was dated 73, then Ron's was probably written on at roughly the same time when Joe Sella wrote his article, when the anonymous caller came in. So that's what I'm still doing. I'm still going through all of these documents, and I do have an update that I posted on the 19th that you might find interesting. And I guess, what names can you remember of people that knew something? I'm going to say Gilson Wright. I'm going to say Everett Patton, St. Clair Switzer. Anybody else that you can remember? Carl Knox. I think Carl Knox knew. You know, I think he was told to step back. When Doc Boone came forward, I think nobody was looking for him. I think that was the cutoff point. They were done, you know. And so there's a select group of people, I think at the university, which were keeping the story as it was. And they want to know more new information. Oscar Decker. I think Oscar Decker. And I definitely think the FBI and the DOJ know. I think they know. And so that's my job, is to try to, I don't know how I'm going to get them to admit it, but, you know, that I'm just going to try, you know. So, any questions? Thank you for listening to all that. That's a lot of stuff. Did I overwhelm you? Yeah, I think so. You mean like Ron? Yeah, I think, because if you're doing, you know, research, you know, they can pay. I'm so glad you brought that up, because something that I totally skipped over was I found an interesting connection to Champion Paper and Fiverr. And so if you want to ever look that up, but, you know, that organization, great organization, Reuben Robertson Jr. was a fantastic human. But I have a feeling they were, you know, he was the Deputy Secretary of Defense from 55 to 57. They hired big deal military people, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Secretary of the Army. I mean, it was like Yeah, that was Champion Paper. And I have it was Carl Knox' note that Dorothy Craig, who worked at Champion Paper, wrote a check to Ron Tammen shortly before he disappeared. And so I'm wondering, maybe that could be it. Yeah.
So do you, I'm a little confused, but
I think,
is that what you're saying?
I'm always afraid. I don't know if he was doing good. I don't know if he was bad. But where my brain is at the moment, yeah, I think Artichoke had something to do with it. And here's the thing. James McCord, he was with the CIA. He was doing Artichoke work when he was with the CIA. At the same time that St. Clair Switzer, I believe, was recruited for Artichoke, James McCord was working for Artichoke. Yeah.
Okay, so you just said that.
Yeah.
Are you implying that?
Here's where I divert this. They're not on the MK Ultra list of all those, all the universities that came out. I have a feeling that St. Clair Switzer was a wannabe person. And he was not a researcher. He was not doing research at Miami. I think maybe they were doing some hypnosis experiments. But I have seen memos where they felt that this person, who I think they were talking about, St. Clair Switzer, wasn't really, in the field that much. However, they respected him, especially the military respected him, and I think they could see him doing consulting work. And, who knows? Maybe Switzer said, we have this excellent candidate. I think Ron Tammen was very suggestible. I think he was very hypnotizable. And so maybe that was somebody that they found would be a great candidate. I do. Yeah, he didn't have money problems anymore, is my thinking.
I don't know if this was a regular thing, but one of the guys I worked with going to Miami part-time. He was looking for volunteers from the guys he knew. Comfortable enough doing this, and then
I don't know. I mean, everything is, this would be 59, did you say? 59,
well, it'd be I started there about the first of 57.
Oh, wow.
Between there and 61.
Okay.
Somewhere in that.
Maybe
somewhere in that period.
let's talk. I think 56, I think I have evidence, I believe, that St. Clair Switzer was on sabbatical during 56, 57, and I think he was working on something very heavily, scary almost. I did not post it, but the questions that they wanted to know about how to people put large groups under without them really knowing it, that kind of thing, they had questions about that. So, yeah, I'd like to talk to you if that's okay. Yeah.
That spidey woman that.
Right.
The woman who apparently this guy shows up.
It's a great, yeah.
I mean, have they drugged this guy up
Right.
and they got him back?
I don't know. I mean, some days I think it's him, and other times there was one person who was in the room at the time, and he went to Frank Smith and he said, I was there. He became her son-in-law. And he's like, I was there. I don't think it was him. However, it's a wild story, and it is, it does sound like it fits. It could be that, he jumped out of the car, or maybe they let him out of the car so that, establish some kind of a sighting, who knows? They did, right, for a red herring, add a little red herring to it. I don't know. But it doesn't, for me, it doesn't much matter because I think he was alive in 2002. I think he was on the security index.
But do you think they wanted the guy for something?
Yeah.
Throw a red herring and then grab the guy?
Oh, I think they wanted
What are
him.
they doing?
I think they were hypnotizing him. Yeah, I think they were. So Louis Jolyon West, this is I'm just hypothesizing here. He was down in Texas at that point. Who knows, drive him to Wright-Patterson, fly him to Texas. Here you go, you've got this great subject. He's going to be dropping out of school anyway because his grades are terrible and he's, right? So, which one? Oh, welcome. No, that was, the only significance of that was, I think, was all of a sudden it gave me all this new data.
Well, that was an aerospace company, according to that.
Okay, interesting. Yeah. That, and the person that called it in wanted to be anonymous, and he didn't want to report why he felt that way. It was, very interesting. I don't know. Yeah, and I spoke with the FBI guys that wrote up that report, by the way. Yeah.
Have you ever felt
Me too.
but have you ever felt threatened or had threats during all of this?
Oh my gosh, there's like, I never really thought about that until I saw James McCord's name, and I'm like, oh my God. I never answer my door. I never did, but now I never answer my door. If I don't know you're coming, I'm not answering. But I just learned something that just freaked me out, and that was where I live, somebody, and I'm telling you guys because you don't know where I live, but I trust you all, but I'm just, but where I live, I was trying to find this person who worked for Cincinnati's FBI. He lives a block from me. I'm not kidding. I was like, oh my gosh. So as soon as I arranged a meeting and we both looked at each other and I'm like, why are you here? And he's like, why are you here? And I'm like, did you know I was here? And he's like, no, I didn't know you were here. And so it was, I was blown away by that. So if anybody has, he's in the perfect position if he wants to have somebody, because he knows where I live. Yeah, it's crazy. Yeah.
I am impressed with the depth and food.
Yeah.
He was a neighbor of mine. He was a very domineering individual. Office was 2 blocks down.
Right.
I think there is a connection between Dr. Boone and the research any of Dr. Boone's records.
No, I haven't.
His house was behind mine. And neighbors told me,
Still?
well, this is about 12 years ago.
That's not bad.
I don't know that it's ever been blue there somewhere.
Well, I'd love to see the card. I haven't seen the card, Joe Sella saw it. That's great. Can I get your information? Can I take down do you have an email address? Do you have an email address? Email?
Well, I can give you my telephone number.
Okay.
I have emailed on it.
Okay. All right. Okay. I think.
One
Yeah.
question.
Yeah.
So you made the statement that if Joe Sella had known about it,
Yeah.
did he pass away before that?
Yeah.
And why is there no information about it?
Because they killed it. They killed that art. They killed that piece of information. That was once and once only. Yeah, Joe Sella died in 1980, in August of 80, 59 years old. And that, I think I'm the one who broke that, you know, that all of a sudden I read to the bottom of the paper and it was like, what? You know? Oh, he would have been all over it. Yeah, GI issues. Yeah. Yeah. I think, or wait a moment. I think it was more of a heart attack. It was immediate. He was at a city council meeting. And yeah.
I know that you said that you're not allowed.
If you'd like to keep up with me, have you been to my website? No. Okay, it's ronaldtammen.com, and it's A Good Man is Hard to Find. And by the way, that was a song that they used to play, the Campus Owls used to play, and it was like, oh, that's perfect. So, yeah, and I've got like over now, I think we're at about 200 posts. So there's a lot there. I skipped over a lot, but yeah. And I will eventually be reporting, but yeah, I just can't do the lawsuit thing. Okay. Yes.
I don't have a question, I have a comment. And if you are interested in it, I've been following it for years.
Thank you. My gosh, thanks so much. Yeah.
Just through that blog, is there a way?
Yes. There is. It's up at the top. It says contact.
Okay.
I also have a Gmail. I think Ron Tammen Project at gmail.com. I think that's it. But go to the contact on the website. Yeah. We good? Okay. I think that's it then. Thank you. Thanks so much. Thank you. A lot of info.